On today's show, Niki Black, Principal Legal Insight Strategist at 8 a.m., attorney and nationally recognized legal technology author and speaker. We'll be talking about what the 2026 Legal Industry Report reveals about AI adoption in law firms, the biggest trends and how legal teams are already using these tools in daily work, and what it all means for law firm growth and profitability, workflow changes, staffing, billing models, and simply staying competitive.
You're going to have to reimagine your skill set, reimagine your interests, and reimagine what you can do in the AI economy, because it's just going to change everything, and whether you like it or not. So, and I've talked to lawyers who were older boomers that were like, yeah, I'm retiring a couple years early because I see this is coming.
Welcome to the Alpha Lawyer Podcast, a show dedicated to exploring what makes law firms thrive. I'm your host, Jason Marsh. Join me as I interview some of the smartest thought leaders and accomplished law firm owners in our space. Together, we'll dive deep into law firm operations, marketing, technology, finance, and everything else you need to build an incredible firm that allows you to live your best life. Hello, welcome back to the Alpha Lawyer Podcast. I'm Jason, and today I'm joined by Niki Black. Hi, Niki. It's great to see you.
Hi, looking forward to this.
Yeah, so I've been looking through your 2026 Legal Industry Report that you wrote with your company, 8 a.m. There's a lot in there, but today I want to focus on really one of the major themes, and of course, that's going to be AI adoption within law firms. And so the data, it makes it pretty clear that AI it's not this theoretical thing anymore. Lawyers, legal professionals, their teams are all using these tools in real workflows. But the thing is, like the firm level strategy, the training, the policies, they're probably not keeping up. So today I want to break down what the report tells us about where AI adoption really stands, how firms are using it, what risks will need to be addressed, and what law firm owners should be thinking about as AI becomes a core part of legal practice. So before we get too deep into this, I want to introduce you to everyone. Again, I'm here with Niki Black. She is the Principal Legal Insight Strategist at 8 a.m. That's the company behind my case, CasePeer, LawPay, DocketWise. Niki is also an attorney, and she's a longtime nationally recognized as a legal technology author and speaker, including this very report, again, the 2026 Legal Industry Report that we're going to go ahead and discuss today. So Niki is very much on the pulse of where legal technology is going, how firms are adapting, and what that data tells us about the future of practicing law. So Niki, one of the things that stood out to me in the report is that AI adoption has very quickly moved from experimental and fun to mainstream use within the firm. And you found in this report, 69% of legal professionals, and by that we mean attorneys, paralegals, staff, admin, et cetera, but 69% of these legal professionals are now using general purpose AI tools for work-related purposes. And so general purpose, right, ChatGPT, Gemini, Claude, et cetera. And now that 69% number, that's up. It was 31% last year, 27% the year before. So we're seeing like almost 3x increases here. Now, at the same time, firm level adoption, training, policy, and just general preparedness seems to be way behind, right? And so I'm going to be throwing out a lot of stats today from your report, Niki. And for those listening, the good news is you can go and download this whole report for free at 8am.com. And maybe this episode will be a good accompaniment as you read through at least the AI part. So, Niki, let's get into this. From what you're seeing, what is actually happening inside law firms right now when it comes to AI adoption?
Well, so just to set the stage, we surveyed over 1,300 legal professionals. It's our fifth year writing this report, and 45% of them were solo practitioners. 38% had 2 to 5 lawyers, and then 12% had 6 to 20 lawyers, and then there was a smaller percentage as you got into larger firms. So I think it's important to have that context when you talk about the 69% of legal professionals that said they were using general use AI tools like ChatGPT and Claude for work-related purposes, because you're talking about the smaller side of the market overall in terms of that data point. But what's interesting is that you have 69% of legal professionals using it, but the statistics about law firms that have actually implemented these tools, it's somewhere in the 40s. So there's a lot of people using these tools off the books. And that's where when we talk about guidance and other governance like training, that becomes really relevant because those numbers are even lower. So it's interesting to see that a ton of people are using it, not necessarily on the books, and they're not getting a lot of governance and instruction on how to actually use these tools.
Yeah, I'm glad. Yeah, I'm glad you pointed that out. We'll talk a little bit more about it later in the show. But part of the reason I'm having you on today is when I spoke to Charity Anastasio a couple weeks ago about AI policy. This report and your name came up multiple times in terms of all the different challenges and uses that are happening. One of which was shadow AI, right? Where whether attorneys and leadership know it or not, AI is being used on some level by people within your firm. And so a big part of this is how do you get your arms around that and manage what tools they're using, how they're using them, and then when. So, but just in terms of overall adoption, I think it's interesting, right? Because you're talking that number, 9%, that's a pretty big number. And of course, you've been in the legal tech space for years. And one of the things I've certainly seen is that lawyers and law firms tend to be lagging or slow adopters of new technology. But not this. This is just it's just ramping up very quickly. Were you surprised in any way by how quickly AI has been adopted within law practice in general?
Well, so if you had asked me before the pandemic, I started covering legal AI tools, pre-generative AI. So in about 2017, I started writing about them and meeting with the CEOs at conferences of the few companies that had AI. And if you'd asked me before the pandemic, I would have been surprised because I've tracked cloud computing since it rolled out in 2007 is when Amazon EC2 rolled out. And I've literally wrote the book on cloud computing for lawyers that was published by the ABA in 2012. And so I tracked cloud usage across that time frame from really probably about 2008 is when I started really paying attention through 2020. And cloud adoption for a long time stalled at about 31%, I would say in about 2013 to 2015. And it was kind of stuck in the 30s until probably about 2018, 19 when it got up into the 40s. But it was the pandemic that pushed it into the majority of lawyers using cloud computing because they had to. They didn't have a choice. So it took over a decade, more than a decade, to get the majority of lawyers into the cloud. But what I think that the pandemic did that was significant was it forced lawyers to use technology. It forced them to understand the benefits of technology. And I heard judges that were significantly older than me talking about Zooming and how great it was. Like that was what they described it, which made me laugh, Zooming. But they were sold on Zoom court hearings and for just regular check-ins to manage their docket. So what it did was it primed the profession to be more receptive to technology and also to be willing to experiment with new technology. So on the other side of the pandemic, you have lawyers using technology at rates they'd never done before. And then all of a sudden in late 2022, this tool that is at its essence incredibly user-friendly rolls out. And the output sounds fantastic and it's really helpful, super user-friendly. And a lot of lawyers just started to experiment with it. And you get this initial output that seems fantastic. And to this day, you still have lawyers making headlines because it's hallucinating. But I think that the pandemic kind of primed us for this. And I definitely say I'm surprised by 69% over 3 years, but even so, I'm not as surprised as it would have been pre-pandemic.
Yeah, you point out how user-friendly it is. And that really is the thing, right? It doesn't take anything to figure out how to use it, at least on its most base level. Whereas we looked at, new tools before, it required real training. It could feel overwhelming logging in and knowing how to use it. And so AI kind of solves a lot of that. So let's talk about going from just general experimentation, right? It's a user-friendly tool. Let's see what it can do for me, to real active work use in firms, right? Because I think at this point, legal professionals aren't just playing around with AI. And according to your report, the top general purpose AI use cases, let's go through some data here, include drafting and correspondence and general research, both of those at around 58%, brainstorming, 54%, summarizing documents, 47%, drafting documents, 43%, drafting document templates, 39%, legal research, a little bit lower at 38%. And so this isn't experimentation anymore. These tools are already inside the day-to-day workflow. And of all those things, I think those are all very good ways to start using and experimenting with AI. The one word I heard you say a couple of times in conjunction with ease of use is the results that you get seem to be accurate. And that's one of the things that comes up around, like the confidence that it gives you to this. But what does the use case data that I just went through here, what does that tell you about how lawyers and just legal professionals in general are actually using AI day to day in the practice of law, whether you're an attorney or your staff, paralegal, admin, et cetera?
Well, so those data points were for general use AI, and then there's some others for legal specific AI. There's a big overlap in terms of the top use cases across both of those. The biggest difference there is that legal research, when you're using legal specific AI, is used a lot more frequently than general purpose AI, which makes sense. It's the legal specific tools are designed for that. But other than that, I do think that what you're seeing across those two different sets of data points is a similarity in use cases and situations where people are not necessarily entering mission critical or confidential information into the tools to get output. So they're often drafting general correspondence and getting that done really quickly, or messages. Sometimes they can really change the tone. A lot of tools have that built in there. 8am does, but so do plenty of others, where you can draft really quickly, say, I want to see dear so-and-so, and just say it very loosely, and then it can be turned into a professional or more empathetic just by the click of a button, so that you can be a better communicator with your clients about difficult issues. But mostly what you're seeing is that lawyers are using it for tedious tasks that take up a lot of time to kind of distill information or to get a simple and easy task off their plate that often involves communication or simple document drafting. And then I think they start to turn to the legal tools for more complex drafting tasks and legal analysis tasks, which, as they should. I'm not sure the general use tools are necessarily equipped with guardrailing on the back end and appropriate limited databases to really deal with those and provide more accurate output. So, but it's interesting to see that there is a commonality across those two, and that you're seeing it arguably less sensitive data is being entered to get that output that they're relying on more frequently.
And in terms of all of that, what would you say are some of the more safer use cases or even natural starting points for the 30% who haven't got into it yet, versus some of the places people need to be more cautious about what information they're putting in, as well as how much they should be trusting what they're getting out without actually vetting or verifying it?
Yeah, well, certainly legal research is the biggest one where you need to carefully review the output, but you need to review the output of anything that it puts out, because it still will change weird little things or add information in that you didn't, even if it's limited to a document. Sometimes it still does some weird stuff. So you have to carefully review output no matter what, but the more legal analysis is involved, the more carefully you need to review it. But, the easiest ways are to have it draft simple communications or brainstorming. It's fantastic for brainstorming. Like examples of situations where lawyers have used it that are really effective are helping to prepare for specific issues related to voir dire or cross-examination. In other words, don't use it to draft your voir dire or your entire cross. But if there's a specific issue you really need to dig into, and you're looking for creative ways to approach it on voir dire or creative ways to corner somebody on cross, it is really helpful at helping you do that. And I know of a public defender here locally who, on a murder trial, was looking to, on voir dire, bring out a really unique issue and start to try to test how the jurors would respond to it. And this is someone who is a really seasoned criminal defense lawyer. And it came up with like a list of 15 potential questions and ways to approach it, some of which this lawyer had never thought of, it didn't occur to them. They'd never done it in prior cases, and they used it, and they got a not guilty verdict. Certainly pulling a good jury is important, but there's a lot more to a not guilty verdict than getting a good jury. But nevertheless, if you've got a receptive jury, it makes it easier to make your client's case. So it's great for brainstorming, and I think that's one of the best ways to start. And then document summarization is another great one, especially if it's not a confidential doc. If you just want a case summarized so that you can then dive in and actually read the case, don't just rely on the summary, but to kind of wrap your brain around what the case says or what law review article says, or your jurisdiction's guide that they just released on how lawyers should use AI, something like that. It's great for those types of things as well.
Yeah, it is great to just dump a whole bunch of information right into, whatever tool you're using and just ask it some questions about that. You summarize it. You can ask questions against it. I know I
Yep.
certainly do that all the time, even if I'm, on a call or taking a bunch of notes. I tend to, type out notes pretty ferociously as I probably don't even need to do that anymore, obviously, because it's just AI is like what we're doing here. I mean, you get a summary of the transcript. So yeah, there's like tons of really fun uses just to get started with. But now let's talk about because what I find is how, and I guess this sorts into like the shadow AI stuff, but the idea that the use of AI within firms is way ahead of what the firm strategy or approach to like how to manage the actual use of that is. And so your report suggests that there is a real gap between individual adoption and firm level adoption and implementation. And so a lot of lawyers and staff are using this AI. And the data point that I thought was interesting is, 46% of firms have adopted general use AI, again, ChatGPT, Claude, Gemini, Microsoft Copilot, and only 34% have adopted legal specific AI tools. What's going on there? Why does that gap between individual use and firm legal specific tools, what is that telling us here? Why the difference?
Well, listen, I think that Copilot, and if the firm, they're either Microsoft or Google environment, right? For email, for calendaring, and both Microsoft and Google have rolled out AI tools into those products. So I think that that's where you're seeing a lot of that initial adoption. And then when it comes to legal specific tools, when companies, most of the tools they're using probably have rolled out, the legal specific tools have probably rolled out generative AI functionality, but usually it's on a higher level tier. So it's not like the basic level. It's usually not the second level. It's like the third level. So sometimes you might have to upgrade your firm to have access to those tools. And so that might be also part of it. And the other part is just, even if the tools they're already using have generative AI available, sometimes the use cases that they need aren't included in that particular tool's functionality. So that would mean they would have to vet legal specific tools, try them out. And the larger the firm is, the more they're doing like pilots and using it for a year to see locking into a contract. So I think when you talk about adoption, it's unclear whether adoption meant have actually officially rolled it out or whether they're piloting it across certain teams, especially as you get into larger firms. But so I think that that's why you're seeing that difference. It probably just has to do with the rollout into Microsoft and Google products that the firms are already using.
Yeah, that does make sense, right? You're in your email and whatever your workspace tools are, AI is built into that, so you're going to start using it. That is a funny thing. It just seems like AI is just any piece of software you use today. There's going to be some AI feature, obviously some better or worse. But the thing I want to get into is in terms of, and it's the accessibility, right? Like if you want to use some legal specific tool, that has to be endorsed by the firm. As you mentioned,
Right.
piloted, it's a process, whereas I'm just going to go in and sign up for ChatGPT and I'm going to have access to that in a few minutes. And so in
Yeah,
doing
that's
all of
probably it
that,
too. That's a good
what's
point.
that?
Yeah. That's a good point it's cheaper to just use ChatGPT on your own versus investing in a legal specific product as a solo person off the books, which is what they're all doing,
Yeah,
clearly.
and that's what I wanted to ask you about. So, okay, so everybody's using it. I like this off the book shadow AI. Basically, the point is it's getting used whether you or not, or have any policies around it. Is that creating any type of problem within firms to have this off the books use?
Well, certainly it is. And it's surprising that the firms, the data about governance and training is so ridiculous compared to the data about usage. With you have only 9% that have a policy in place that's enforced, and only 11% right now of mandatory training, according to the data from the report. So that's just kind of ridiculous compared to the amount of people that are actually using these tools. It's like a free for all. Who knows what they're doing? Who knows whether they're following any type of appropriate rules or use case scenarios? So, I mean, certainly it's exposing to the firms to liability, and that's what's so surprising. Is that I don't know if they're turning a blind eye to the fact that their employees are using it, or if they just don't understand that they're using it. I'm not sure which one it is, but most lawyers are risk averse. So you would think that they would be scrambling to provide some governance at least, and tell them what tools they can and can't use, or just a policy that says you can't use it. At least come up with a policy. Use generative AI to create the policy. I just wrote my above the law article on that. I'm not sure if it's been published yet, but I literally talked about this data and said, if you don't have a policy, just use generative AI to create one. At least get a policy on the books because your employees are using it.
Yeah, it's funny. That's exactly what Charity said. Just use your AI tool to at least draft something for you, and then you can review it and circulate
Right,
it and
edit it.
have a discussion around what it says. But that's a nice, easy use case and starting point. But you mentioned the risks, right? And I think this is important that we highlight this. What are the risks when people are using AI off book, as you say, without any type of firm policy or usage or anything? What are those risks?
Well, there's certainly a lot of them. If they're using free versions of ChatGPT or Gemini or Claude, then, and if they haven't turned off and I don't think you can turn the training setting off if it's a free version, then everything that they enter in there is being pulled into the model and used to train the model to provide additional output. So there's a risk that what your employees are entering in there could potentially start being a response to other inquiries, maybe to opposing counsel. Who knows? Is the likelihood that's going to happen high? No, but is it possible? Yeah. And do the ethical obligations say that you can't do that? Yes. It's pretty clear that you need to make sure that that's not happening. So you have that risk. You have a risk that there's all the privilege issues that are and work product issues right now that are cropping up, and that the courts are falling on either side of, whether entering this information in their waves, either work product or attorney-client privilege. And so you run the risk of that becoming a big issue that could potentially negatively impact your client's cases. And you also have the risk that they may not understand that the output is not necessarily accurate and that they have to carefully review it. And I think that in part explains why there are so many, not just lawyers, but courts now. There was just a headline today about a court. These hallucinated cases and propositions, legal propositions, are showing up in court opinions now. I mean, they're starting to show up in our sources of truth that everybody refers to. So it's really the blurring the line between reality and fiction at a core level. So there's a lot of concerning things going on, and governance would help prevent some of this.
Yeah, and when you mention how often this stuff is showing up in courts, I have to imagine judges are probably deeply frustrated by this, and as time goes on, the consequences for it showing up as a result of the frustration are just going to get more and more severe. Because at the end of the day, I think for most people is you can use AI, but you're responsible for whatever you're putting out there, whatever it is, whether it's a brief or a filing or even just an email. That's your responsibility to go ahead and verify it. And I've talked to Charity, also talked to Jennifer Ellis about it as well. It's just it's becoming a real problem. I do want to highlight, because you pointed out some of the things in the report, because we're talking about AI adoption at the firm level, and where the concerns for firms, regardless of size, what are their concerns about actually doing that? And I think, let me list off some of those. I think the top concerns were really around data security, right? And that makes sense. 46 saying they feel like that is significantly going to slow their adoption. Also, the ethic issues, that was 42% of people surveyed were concerned there. You mentioned the privilege issues, 39%. And then another big one, it's still at 39%, which is a high number, is just a lack of trust in the results. I think in terms of adoption, it's not so much that firms are being slow in the way that maybe they have been historically. It's just really a concern about the governance, accountability, confidentiality, all the professional responsibility, all the things that attorneys think about and are concerned with. But my question for you would then be, like, how should a firm owner think about trying to balance these risks of trying to use AI and not get left behind, but also the risks of some of the things that we just talked about? What are some of the concerns that you feel are the most justified, the ones that they should be paying most attention to when starting to consider rolling out legal AI tools firm-wise, or even some of the general use ones?
I think it's the data security and how your law firm's data is handled. But that's always been an issue. One of the things you do when you choose a cloud provider is you have to vet that provider about those very issues. And so that's why legal specific providers tend to be, for a lot of attorneys, for certain use cases, the best bet, because you, especially the software tools you're already using, you already trust those providers to handle your firm's data. Presumably you do appropriately, especially financial and confidential data. So if they are rolling out AI, there's a pretty good bet that you are going to be able to, after talking to them, trust them to appropriately handle your firm's data in ethical and compliant ways. But then the other issue is with the general purpose tools, sometimes they are just better at the things that law firms need to use AI for. And so there are tiered levels available there too that protect your firm's data in different ways. And you need to research, certainly you should pay for general purpose software, at least pay the $20 fee per person. But then there are team and enterprise levels that have a lot more data control and that give the firm the ability to control how the users in the firm access it and what they can and can't do. I think it's important to consider those options as well. And then the other thing with the output, the verifying output, in my opinion, that is not an AI problem. It gets billed as an AI problem, but it isn't. It's a competence problem. It's an attorney competence problem that has always existed. Attorneys have always done this. They have used other people's memos without fully reading them and just copied and pasted them and changed the facts. Attorneys have cited cases without fully reading them or understanding them, without shepherdizing or case citing them to ensure that they're up to date. Lawyers have always done this, but in the past, they were given the benefit of the doubt. Oh, the case cite is like 2 numbers off. It must just be a typo. Well, they probably meant to cite it for this instead, or they must have just inadvertently cited this case for the wrong proposition, because it was easy to give people the benefit of the doubt, especially when you have string citations, right? So there's a random case in there that doesn't fit, but the other ones do fit for that proposition. But with generative AI, when the case just doesn't exist, it's a lot. I mean, it's absolute proof that this person didn't fully review both the citations and the underlying premise for which the case is cited. So it reveals the ugly underbelly of our profession, that there's been a lot of competence issues all along, and now it just provides clear evidence that they are there. And I don't think that's an AI problem, but that's not just, and it's a basic competence problem. If you're going to cite a case, you better have read it and understand that it stands for the proposition you say that it does. That's what lawyers should be doing all along, but they haven't been. And they're still not,
it sounds
obviously.
like what you're describing is an existing thing that's been happening forever, but now technology, specifically, is just accelerating that to such a degree, again, because they're very easy to access and to use. And then, of course, the hallucinations. And I'm sure you've looked at there's a guy, I can't remember his first name. He's got a whole website on like hallucinated case.
It's like 1,000 so far, over 1,000.
What is it?
There's over 1,000 of them that he's tracked. I can't remember his name.
Yeah, and they just keep coming up, and I'm sure this guy's probably not even tracking anywhere close to most of them.
The reality. Yeah.
I want to get into the training and the policy, because I think that's where the big gap is. And your report, there's some pretty stark findings here. So I want to talk about that. You alluded to them earlier, but let's just go through that, because I think these are some of the most important findings in the report around AI. So more than half, 54% of respondents said their firm provides no AI training and has no current plans to do so. 43% said have no formal AI policy and no plans to develop one. And only 9% said their firm has a written and enforced AI policy. Wow. What does that tell you about the preparedness of law firms right now when it comes to AI?
Well, so I do wonder that with those 2 data points of no AI training, no plans to do so, no formal policy, no plans to create one, I'm guessing that some of the people that responded don't know what their firms are planning, because that seems pretty crazy that almost, if you average that out, you've got half of 54 and 43%. It's like half of firms essentially have no plans to create one or to train. That doesn't make any sense. So I think it may be that some of those people just weren't aware of those plans. But certainly, even if it was just 25% have no training and no plans to do so, and 25% have no formal policy and no plans to do so, that's pretty crazy. So, but it may be because they're like, oh, well, we're not going to use AI, in which case I think they're fooling themselves, both because they're clients or employees are already using it. Plus, it's just getting built into everything. It's almost impossible to avoid using AI, which is enough also, as an aside, why I think that those individual court policies that require you to attest to whether you've used AI or not, the answer is yes. If you use Grammarly, or if you're using Word, you're probably using AI, or legal research tools and you don't realize you're even using it. So I think it's
Yeah,
silly.
that's true. There really is going to be nowhere to hide. I mean, even my email, I get an email, there's
Right.
already a teed up response that I could just hit send, which I don't often do. I'll at the very least read it and edit it. But it is interesting, right? Because when you talk about, okay, more than half of 54 responsive respondents said their firm provides no A and no current plan. It's okay. It's one thing if you don't yet have a policy, but to say we've got no plans on that, I mean, that's where it starts to get crazy, right? Whether it's the
Right.
training or a policy. So hopefully next year, when we look at these numbers, maybe we'll see the type of jump that we saw just in terms of utilization. But let's just talk about, in terms of training, like if a firm wants to say, all right, we want to put some training in place. And of course you can go to an AI tool and ask it what type of training, but for the purposes of what we're talking about, what should some of the basic AI training include?
An understanding of what's confidential, what's not. What does the firm consider sensitive information? What does it not consider to be? What type of confidential or sensitive information can be uploaded into which tools, and proper uses of the AI tools and and ways that you shouldn't be using them. An obligation to make sure they know that they have to review all output. Those are the things that immediately jump to mind for me. Then that you can only use the specific tools that they say that you can use, listing the ones that they can and cannot use, and that they can't use personal tools. They can only use the firm approved ones. And also probably like help understanding how to appropriately query it, depending on the types, what the prompts should potentially look like, and ways to use it more efficiently. And also like probably the firm's process for if there's questions about it, or if you want to request that a new tool be added, and the systems that are in place to for that type of thing as well.
And who in the firm do you feel like should need to be trained first? Right. If you got to create a pecking order of, all right, we're going to roll out some training, and obviously there's different roles within the firm. Where do you start? My guess would be like start where the stakes are the highest, train the attorneys that are going to be citing cases or case summaries and so forth. Make sure if they're using the tools, they know what they're doing, and at least how to verify what's coming out of it is correct. But what's your take on that?
Well, that's one thing. There was an interesting data point in the report where we asked, like, who do you plan to train, or who's already trained? And it was interesting to see the partners. There was something like 30% said partners. And that was interesting. And I think it was because probably the partners were learning about it so that they could probably make better decisions about it, and understand how to implement it and create policies. I do think partners will use it sometimes, but you would presume that for a lot of the work that partners do, which is the analytical and strategic work, AI may not be quite as helpful for them as it is for the people that are doing the legal research, that are writing the memos, that are writing the client communications on behalf of the partner. I mean, usually partners are not knee deep in that type of thing. So I think it's interesting, and I think it's important to make sure that they understand these tools and how to use them properly, because they're the ones helping to set those policies. But I think paralegals and admins, the ones that create the documents and that draft the correspondence, I think it's important for them to understand it too. So I think it's hard to the priority should be just everybody, just training them on different things. I don't know. It's hard to not prioritize everyone.
I know. That's what I was thinking. I'm like, the whole chain is impactful in some way. Obviously, the people doing a lot of the grunt work, the research, the writing, all
Yeah.
that stuff, they're going to be the quickest to probably want to find shortcuts. Now,
Right.
of course, more the attorneys, the senior attorneys that are then signing off on this stuff, they obviously need to understand it because it's got their name on it and the stakes are higher. So yeah, it is kind of interesting in that regard. I had another thought or a question, but I can't remember what it was. I'll probably come back to me at some other point when we're not on the topic anymore. But let's talk about AI's impact just on pricing. Obviously, pricing, flat fees, different types of fee structures have been discussed for years, but just the business model as a whole, because the report does get into pricing, and it said about 25% of respondents expect AI to reduce billable hours per matter, right? Okay, that makes sense. You can work through things more quickly. And then 22% expect greater adoption of fixed fees or alternative type of fee fixed arrangements. So it's not just a technology issue, right? As you know, technology obviously affects all businesses, but it then changes business models. In some cases, it wipes out entire business models. But how do you think AI is going to affect billing, pricing, and just the overall economics of running a law firm?
I think it's going to be super interesting to see how that plays out, because the large law firms are the ones that have their compensation structures and that are built around that billable hour model in a pretty inflexible ways, arguably, compared to smaller firms. The smaller the firm is, the more easily it can pivot to different billing models, and they're just more flexible. And so I think what you're going to see is that market competition, is going to eventually force the large law firms to kind of rethink everything that they do and the way that their firms are structured. Because what you're going to see happening is, and I predict it's going to start in two very specific areas: in-house counsel and then insurance companies. In my mind, those are two of the most sophisticated consumers of legal services around. So in-house counsel, attorneys within large companies that often outsource a lot of the legal work to large law firms. The attorneys are the ones approving the work that is outsourced and reviewing the work that is outsourced. And they are also some of the highest adopters of AI. So they understand how AI can be used and how much time it should actually take to accomplish these tasks that they're outsourcing. And they're going to review these bills that they get, and they're already doing this, and they're saying that's ridiculous. If you used AI, it would have been half as much. Or another thing that's happening is they're getting a lot of the initial work done using AI internally before they outsource it. So it's reducing the amount of hours that has to be, the amount of work that has to be outsourced. So they're going to be a force that is going to start pushing back on large law firms. And then with insurance, if you're a law firm or lawyer that handles insurance defense work, and I used to handle that when I was a litigator. They have always historically been some of the first ones to push back, to come up with billing codes, to refuse to pay for certain types of things, or to say a paralegal should have handled this, not a lawyer. We're not going to pay you at the lawyer rate. They're a very sophisticated consumer of legal services, and they also are going to understand that if the firm used AI, it shouldn't have taken 4 hours. It should have taken 2. And so they're also like, I've heard anecdotal evidence are pushing back on this. So you're going to see that happening. Then the other thing that's going to happen is and this has happened in the past with just other types of technology too, but when in large law firms, some partners will leave and take a book of business and spin up a boutique law firm at a specific practice area. AI is going to empower them even more than technology has in the past to be able to bill really competitively against those large law firms. So to use AI both to review past billing practices and past cases, and to help them come up with flat fee or alternative fee arrangements that will be quite likely profitable, and also fair pricing that will be competitive, that clients will like, and undercut the large law firms. And so all of these forces are going to push against large law firms and even mid-sized firms, because they're often the ones that do the insurance defense work, and start forcing them to rethink their billing models. And I think you're going to see that happening a lot more often. And you're also going to see clients saying, you sent me a copy of this letter and AI reviewed it for me in 20 seconds and helped me understand what it said. Why are you charging me 10 minutes for it? And you have the skill to read faster and presumably understand what it says better than I do. Why aren't you using AI? So I think you're even going to see general consumers that aren't like that are a little less sophisticated, or what's the word? There's a word for it. Instead of B2B, it's B2C. Those types of consumers of legal services, family law, will, trust, estates, criminal defense.
This is a fascinating development, right? Because when you're talking about the consumer level, you can just take something. I mean, I think there's people that are trying to do their own legal work to some extent, just using some of these even general purpose tools. I think it was Charity, and I don't know if I've got this stat somewhat right, but she was saying, I think that even take the worst performing general model, it could still pass the bar exam like at 88% or something like that, at like a very high number. And so you just wonder how that's going to play out. I mean, you described some scenarios, whether it's coming from the large, sophisticated corporate clients or just the consumer clients that are just taking what you give them. And I've heard this across all sorts of different businesses where you send your client or a customer an email and then you get back this like 25 bullet point question thing that clearly came from AI. And people are just like, what am I supposed to do with this? And probably they stick it in AI and send them back the answers. And at some point, just like, have my AI talk to your AI. Let me know how it ends
Right.
up. But you mentioned insurance companies, obviously sophisticated buyers of legal service, obviously will be pressuring if you're not using like the firms, like if, will they literally just take their business elsewhere? If you're more of a traditional firm or you fall in that category of, I don't know, whatever 40% that's left that, or 30% that hasn't quite adopted it yet. I mean, forget, hey, you're going to have people questioning your bills. They're literally going to take their business. I think, as you said, somebody else leaves the practice, spins up a boutique. Now they're able to operate very efficiently. Be easy to win that business if you say, hey, we can do the same work, charge you half the price or whatever the percentage is. You know, that how real is that for attorneys and firms and leadership that is listening to something like this?
Well, I think that's absolutely going to happen, and I think that a lot of corporate counsel have already done that in some cases, right? And I think it's going to take a year or two from now where you're really going to start to see the impact and the extent of it. Because it's one thing to say this is going to happen; it's another thing for it to actually happen, and for large law firms to completely restructure, which is a big deal, to change their compensation plans and to change their pricing to alternative fee arrangements. So it'll be interesting to see how that actually plays out. But I think that you will see a lot more of that happening than ever before. Is it going to kill the billable hour? Probably not. Is it going to impact it and reduce the amount that it's used for legal billing? Probably.
Yeah,
I
but
think
this
it's
is
pretty
happening
likely.
everywhere in all these type of service businesses. And like technology has always done since the steam engine, it changes the way we work. It changes the pace of being able to get things done and just the structure of all types of industries. And then jobs change. And so let's talk about that, right? Because your report also suggests that AI is likely to reshape law firm roles over the next few years. And so I think it was 41% of respondents expect new AI specialist or legal technologist roles to be created. 39% expect a reduction in paralegal or support roles. 21% expect a reduction in junior associate positions. At the same time, 22% expect an expansion of paralegal support roles. So the picture isn't simply like AI replaces people. It's going to change things, right? It's as simple as that. So how do you think AI is going to change staffing and roles inside of law firms over the next few years, or as far ahead as we can theoretically see right now?
I mean, I think it's going to be a continuation of what's already happened. It may accelerate it, but there are roles now where all the lawyers do is e-discovery and document review using some of the top e-discovery software platforms. Those roles didn't exist before. My role didn't exist before. You know, I practiced law for over a decade, and I've been with a legal tech company for 14 years now, externally providing education about the intersection of law and tech, and internally kind of providing an analyst or consultant role across teams. I sit on the product team, but that role, I think I was one of the first people hired into this role. And now most major legal tech companies have somebody in this role that used to be a lawyer like I was. So you already had technology creating. And then there's like these knowledge management roles that expanded and changed within large law firms. And tech already started to create all sorts of different jobs where legal expertise in one form or another was a precursor or a foundational requirement to get that role. And I think it's just going to happen more and more. There are going to be roles that we didn't conceive of that are going to be created because of AI. People are going to have to be willing to pivot, both in the legal field and outside of it. I mean, that's what's happening. You're going to have to reimagine your skill set, reimagine your interests, and reimagine what you can do in the AI economy, because it's just going to change everything. And whether you like it or not. So, and I've talked to lawyers, older boomers that were like, yeah, I'm retiring a couple years early because I see this is coming. I'm unwilling to do what I need to do to catch up with all this. I'm just going to retire. And they've just like thrown their hands up. And it's not like a single thing. I think that's almost like a trend that's happening. They're just retiring, which quite frankly, I don't think is a bad thing, because we had a lot of the silent generation that hung on way too long, and some of the boomers were hanging on way too long. So I don't think that's not a bad trend. Let
Yeah,
them go
it is
enjoy
funny though.
retirement.
Yeah, They're just like, I'm out of here. I'm done with this. I don't have it in me to figure this out and solve in some way. But in terms of, because the one thing I hear pretty repeatedly and just everywhere is like, all right, if you're worried about your job being replaced by AI, the first thing you should be doing, and you just alluded to this, figure out how to do your job with AI, figure out how to integrate it into what you're already doing. Maybe your job gets completely wiped out, but maybe you also then in the process develop a set of skills that are going to make you more valuable as AI adoption increases. So what are some of those skills like within the law practice, whether you're an attorney, or a support team member, what type of skills do you recommend, whether it's using general purpose or even some of the legal specific AI tools?
I think the more that you use AI, the more that you're open to the possibilities of what it can do, the more comfortable you become with it. So if for some reason you're in a support role in a firm and they lay some people off and replace it with AI, you're able to understand the things that you can do with AI, and it helps you understand or visualize maybe other ways that you can work or other things that you can bring to the table. I mean, I think that I think that it's just a matter of understanding AI, understanding the trends, kind of seeing the writing on the wall, and being willing to pivot. And I don't think there's any specific tools or things that you can do or skills that you can gain other than just familiarity with AI and use it as much as you possibly can. I always think of it as like a assistant that sits on my shoulder that really wants to help me, that has a pathological lying problem. So you just kind of have to have a realistic perspective of what AI can do for you. And sometimes it may help you think outside the box about your role or about even what you think you want to do with your life, right? So I think that you got to look at it. Sometimes I hate when sometimes corporate lingo it's not a challenge, it's an opportunity, but I still think I think that's very fitting for this. It is like an opportunity to try to kind of revisualize or reinvent yourself. And so I don't know if there's a specific thing that I would suggest that people do other than just dive in and learn as much as you can about it, both for work and otherwise.
Yeah, because otherwise you're going to get left, because it's just going to continue to evolve and get more complex. And so the longer you wait, the harder it is going to be able to get in there and figure it out and figure out how to use it. Which roles do you feel like are most likely to be the ones that are going to change first across the practice?
Well, I think that it has always been the case that when partners decide that technology is going to replace someone, it's always far down at the totem pole from them. Even though that may not necessarily be the most appropriate application of tech, that's the way they're going to do it. So it's going to be admin roles. And the problem with firms is they are very hierarchical, and it's the lawyers and everyone else. And it's very frustrating, I think, for a lot of people that work in firms, because the work that they do is really important and is foundational for a lot of the work that gets done in firms, and they don't get all the credit or the compensation, quite frankly, that they deserve. But so I do think it's going to be admin roles, potentially paralegal roles and I think that's already happening. And then entry-level associate roles as well. And that's a whole different issue. It's almost like a podcast in and of itself. Like, what is our entire profession going to do? How are law schools going to start training them? Because if they don't get these entry-level positions into firms, they're not going to get trained. And then also, what are the firms going to do in 5 years when they want to promote people when they're not hiring lawyers into those positions, and there's no one to lateral in from other firms because they're all doing the same thing? So what does that look like? It's like, how do you 5 or 6 years from now promote somebody into either equity partner or non-equity partner when you don't have anyone that's been working their way up the ladder? So there's all sorts of issues that this presents, and it's going to restructure both law schools, entry-level work, and then how law firms think about promotion and how law firms think about the work that's done by everyone else in the firm that isn't an attorney.
Yeah, it is extraordinary, right? Because, we know technology historically, it always changes things, but I mean, the extent to which this change is going to be is enormous. And you mentioned law school. I mean, literally right down the value chain of, from your first day in law school all the way to your most senior attorneys. So let's talk about integration for a moment, okay? And before we wrap up, but AI was ranked as the legal technology investment most likely to deliver the biggest ROI of the next 3 years. In your report, 29% of the respondents just choosing AI tools overall, and 51% among firms with 21 or more lawyers. So it seems that the slightly larger firms are definitely getting on this train. But the one thing I wanted to highlight here, because I think it's important, is the report. The conclusion it seems to draw is that it's not one single product that's likely to drive the meaningful change in ROI on its own, but it's the best results are going to come from a blended package of different tools that are going to be integrated together, right? Charity said exactly this. It's not a one-size-fit-all tool. We've seen this. Forget AI. Just look at the software and the SaaS model over the last couple of decades. Rarely do you have one tool that does everything. Oftentimes, the better system is a series of tools that work together, each one that is really good at one or a handful of specific things. So how should firms decide where and how AI is going to fit into their workflows?
Well, there's a business of law and there's the practice of law, and AI is equally useful across those two different types of functions and software tools. And I think you kind of have to look at those separately, but I think what generative AI is going to do and is already doing is making a law firm's entire tech stack across the business and practice of law more accessible through, I think you might see like Claude with a legal plugin at the top connected to all of those legal tools, both the practice of law and the business of law. And that becomes the initial entry point into your firm's software to get data that you initially need. And then if you need more complex information, you get pulled into each software tool. But I think because that generative AI conversational interface is so useful and so powerful when connected across all of your legal software, that it may become sort of the hub for initial inquiries. But I do think that especially when it comes to the business of law, I think there's an interesting thing happening. I think that the practice of law and the tools that software that provides practice of law output is the most at risk because of generative AI. Because generative AI is starting to do a lot of that really well. It's starting to do especially the transactional work, but even the legal research. That's also another whole issue. But I recently used Claude Legal with Midpage, which is a legal AI startup. And I've tested a bunch of different legal research tools. And Claude Legal by far is the best legal researcher, if you will, when it's connected to a database of trusted legal sources. So even with legal research, I think you're going to find that the general AI tools, as long as they have a good database, may end up doing the best job. But it's the business of law that I think is safer, because the business of law tools understand how to protect your firm's confidential and proprietary information, including your law firm's financial information, how to manage it properly, how to ensure ethical compliance in ways that it's very hard to. I think it's almost impossible to have a general AI be able to do all of that because it's so specific to our industry in a way that the practice of law, it's different than the practice of law. And so I think it'll be interesting to see how that all plays out. But I do think that you're going to find that the business of law tools in particular are going to be less threatened, but they still will need these strong integrations into some of those general purpose tools, because ultimately it helps provide context across legal practice and business tools. Sometimes you need to combine information across those to get initial inquiry responses that are relevant, and then do a deeper dives into specific software sometimes if needed. And I don't know if that makes sense. It's kind of a complex overview of a simplified overview of a complex process, but
yeah, it is. But I think what you explained is like, I think it was Claude in terms of research does really well, but when integrated with a legal tool that has all of the actual legal research in it, and it's not pulling it from God knows where the training's coming from. And that's the idea. It's the integration between tools that one tool does one thing really well, one other tool either does the thing well or has the information the other tool needs. And then that's how you can actually get more consistent and effective results. So in terms of like just bringing this all together as we start to wrap up here, clearly this report is showing the adoption in firms moving very quickly, but the problem is the leadership, the training, the policy, the workflow design, all that stuff is still kind of catching up. And so for a law firm owner listening to this, what should they do next just to get serious about AI in a responsible way, what's I don't know, what's the one thing that they could do just to start this month if they haven't really gone down the road with AI that well, or they're just starting out?
Well, what I always tell people to do is to choose one of the general purpose tools, Claude, Gemini, ChatGPT, pay for the entry level, which is usually around $20. Go in there and turn off the settings for training. And then throughout for 1 or 2 weeks, every time you have a task that lands on your desk and you think, oh, I don't want to deal with this, I'm going to put this on the back burner. Stop yourself, ask yourself, can generative AI do this for me? And ahead of time, decide what type of information you're willing to enter into generative AI and where you've decided certain types shouldn't be. So then the next step is this information that I'm comfortable entering into the tool? If so, or can I
You can
redact it so that
anonymize
I'm,
data, right? You can,
yeah, right.
just take certain,
Yeah,
specific details or things out of
right.
it that are going to protect you and potentially your clients.
Right. So each time you need to go through that thought process, it just takes a second and then use the tool and see how quickly can it help you get this task off of your virtual desk, if you will, where when you otherwise would have backburned it. And I think that you'll find that just by going through that, you're going to start using it. You're going to start understanding how it can fit into your workflows. You're going to start accidentally creating prompts that you can rely on. And when you see yourself asking the exact same thing over and over again, copy it and save it into your notes or save it into another document and eventually add it potentially into the like general instructions for the tool, or create a project within the tool for a certain task and put the instructions into the project so it gets applied every single time. But you'll start to find the ways that it'll fit into your workflows, the ways that you think you're going to use it, and then you decide, first of all, you familiarize yourself with how you're going to use it. And then you can decide, do I want a legal specific tool for these majority of ways that I'm using it? Or is this tool good enough? And if it's good enough for me, then you start talking to your employees and figuring out how they're going to use it or how they're already using it and not telling you, and don't penalize them for that. But I think at that point, then you can start to determine where you want to invest in both learning and actually invest your firm's money into choosing some of these tools and using them.
Yeah, that's great advice. Yeah, just start using it. Treat it, like you said, like an assistant. Try to get it to do as much stuff as you can. You'll start to see what it can do well, and you'll understand its capabilities. When it comes to that shadow use, and that you mentioned that people are using it, I talked to one attorney, Todd Smith. He's an injury attorney in Orlando. He's a friend of mine, but he was saying one of the things he does within his firm is at their weekly meeting with his team, they have a section in the agenda to talk about AI, so they can go around and ask how everyone is actually. So just to open it up, and then you can actually hear how people are using it. They can learn from one another. I think that was a really smart practice that he explained. That's just easy enough to do. Just have a conversation about it with your team, and then you'll find out a lot from that and can learn from one another. Okay, so if you had to summarize, it's going to be the last question here, Niki. If you had to summarize the report's message on AI in a sentence or two, what would it be?
Your employees are already using it. You need to get governance in place, and your top priority should be to familiarize yourself with these tools ASAP.
Awesome. Well, I'm
If you
here
haven't
with Niki.
already.
Yeah. What's that? What's the last bit?
If you haven't already.
If you haven't already. Well, I'm sure lots of people listening here have. But okay, I'm here with Niki Black. She's the principal and principal legal insight strategist at 8 a.m. And she's the author of the report that we're talking about, 2026 Legal Industry Report, which, we've been covering what the data reveals about AI adoption in law firms, where firms are lagging, and what law firm owners should be thinking about next. You can visit 8am.com to download the 2026 Legal Industry Report. I'll make sure to include links in the show notes. You can find Niki. Where can people find you, Niki? I know you're on LinkedIn. Anywhere else you want to point people to get in touch with you if they want to learn more about some of the things you're working on?
Yeah, besides LinkedIn, they can email me at Niki.Black, Niki.Black @mycase.com. So that's another way to get a hold of me.
What is that again? Just do it in one shot. My Plake? What was that?
Niki.Black @mycase,
Oh,
mycase.com.
gotcha.
Mycase.com.
Okay, mycase.com. All right, cool. So, all right, that sounds good. Well, thank you so much, Niki. I really appreciate you joining me today. So this is Niki Black, everybody. That's going to be it for today. Got a lot more interesting, fun shows coming up, so please stay tuned, and we will see you next time. Bye-bye. Thanks for listening to the Alpha Lawyer Podcast. I'm your host, Jason Marsh, and I appreciate you joining us today. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe, leave a review, and share it with other lawyers who might benefit. You can find more resources and insights on building a thriving law firm at alphalawyer.io or the Alpha Lawyer YouTube channel. Till next time, keep building the firm of your dreams so you can live your best life.